Hey everybody, and Tony here with my review of Wagner's Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, which I saw at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. The conductor was Ulf Schirmer. The production was done by Jossie Wieler, Anna Viebrock, and Sergio Morabito. The assistant set designer was Thorsten Gerhard Köpf. The assistant costume designer was Charlotte Pistorius. The lights were handled by Olaf Frese. The assistant director was Filina Titzel. The chorus master was Jeremy Bynes, and the dramaturgs were Sergio Morabito and Sebastian Hanusa. This production of Meistersinger von Nürnberg by Wagner premiered at the Deutsche Oper Berlin 1 year and 5 months ago. And my main reason for checking out tonight's performance of this production of Meistersinger von Nürnberg was because this boasted a cast full of veterans and newcomers, not only to the opera world, but also in terms of this opera. From Albert Pesendorfer as Veit Pogner, all the way up to Elena Zalagova, who made her role debut as Eva Pogner. But before I get on with the singers, I'd like to talk about the production first. The production basically transported the action from 14th to 15th century Germany all the way up to Germany in the 1990s, all the way up to the 2000s in a music institution. So what we're looking at is, instead of castles and a lot of medieval buildings, Gothic buildings, as well as a lot of fine architecture and greenery and a lot of forests and woods and huts and cabins and cottages, we instead get one solitary institution in the first two acts. And in the third act, the institution turns into a performance venue in which the master singers perform, mainly Sixtus Beckmesser and Walter von Stolzing. And in terms of the costumes, the master singers themselves are basically dressed up as either professors or people who have very important careers, whether they be music specialists or basically any craft that entails very high positions in the 2000s or even the 1990s. We even have Hans Sachs, the cobbler, barefoot in the first two moments of the opera, and his shoes are not really varied, but they consist of various colored Crocs or house shoes in which his customers and his fellow master singers collect, and they even wear his Croc shoes at the final moments of the opera. And speaking of the final moments of the opera, there's even a storm scene in which the master singers, the apprentices, and the various characters of the opera all do this frenzied dance as if though they were blown by a gust of wind. And there is just so much frenzy going on, especially with all the preparations for the prize songs to be sung. And in terms of some of the character constellations, the intimate moments between Hans Sachs and Eva are way edgier in this production. Yes, the attraction between Hans Sachs and Eva was innocent in traditional productions, but in this production, there are several moments in which Eva flirts with Hans Sachs, and Hans Sachs attempts to have his way with her in the second moment of the opera, and even batters Walter von Stolzing on the head with a whiskey bottle, as if to say that there are two sides to Hans Sachs. The first is this firm yet appreciative cobbler who wants to uphold German music traditions. But on the other hand, we get to see a very charged up and extremely aggressive man who tends to get all defensive and even get physical with anybody who either threatens him or feels like he needs to have his way with certain people, especially Eva. And even in the first moments of the opera, the attraction between Eva and Walter von Stolzing is very clear, even to the point that at the end of the opera, they don't want any part of the Master Singers Guild and want to form their own guild. Whereas with David and Magdalena, it is extremely sticky and more dysfunctional than the lovey-dovey romance between Walter and Eva. There are moments in which David and Magdalena fight. There are moments in which they still stay separated even after the end of the opera. And it also shows that there is a juxtaposition between the functional yet rocky, yet absolutely dynamic relationship between Walter and Eva and the more dysfunctional and the more tension-filled relationship between David and Magdalena. Even the apprentices have way more stage time, especially considering that they participate in just going off on Hans Sachs for their Croc shoes and even serving as David's assistant apprentices, as well as Sixtus Beckmesser's co-musicians. And instead of a lute that Sixtus Beckmesser plays when he tries to woo Eva, and even when he tries to sing his failed prize song, it is a piano that he ends up playing. And speaking of his failed prize song, he instead ends up getting thrown off the stage by not only the fellow master singers, but also the members of the audience. So this production did have some fun and interesting concepts to be thrown here and there, and the upgrade from 14th to 15th century Germany all the way up to Germany in the 1990s to the 2000s was quite an interesting and fun upgrade, but I'm sort of a traditionalist and I would really love my traditional productions a lot more. But for those of you who are brave enough to watch this production, especially when it diverges a lot from the libretto, I say kind of give this a go, but do keep an open mind. The rest of you who are traditionalists and prefer to watch a traditional production of Meistersinger von Nürnberg, complete with elegant costumes, gorgeous scenery, lots of castles, cabins, huts, cottages, and all of that wonderful architecture, as well as extremely beautiful instruments, you might as well stick with a traditional production of Wagner's Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg. With my thoughts on the production out of the way, let's get on to the singers, starting off with Albert Pesendorfer as Veit Pogner. It's no surprise that he not only performed this role for many years, but also the slightly higher role of Hans Sachs. And here he was singing the more basso profondo role of Veit Pogner, which he has been doing for several years. And this was a role that he has been maintaining in his repertoire for several years as well. His voice continued to show strength, virility, as well as sufficient darkness to make Veit Pogner come alive, and his stage presence was just as charming, just as virile, and just as exciting to witness. And they were also reflective of how he managed to keep his well-tuned and well-oiled technique to the nines. Yes, one could argue that I would have preferred a darker, deeper, richer, and more cavernous voice, a la Gottlob Frick or Kurt Böhme, or even my personal favorite of all time, Martti Talvela, and even Bengt Rundgren. However, Albert Pesendorfer was a thoroughly strong performer, as he has always been, and it's always a treat to see this wonderful basso profondo, who can also sing basso cantante roles, just rock it as Veit Pogner. Therefore, I salute Mr. Pesendorfer for all of his efforts. And I also do hope to see him one day as Hans Sachs, because he also performed that role in select opera houses. However, his performance tonight as Veit Wagner was superb all around. Johann Reuter was a pretty good Hans Sachs. He has the strong stage presence, he has the virility, he has that type of roughness and toughness that he has one moment, but also that honor for the German arts in the next moment, as well as that friendly roguishness and sagacity that he managed to maintain in a role that he has also sung for several years. His voice is quite decent, especially in the last moments of the opera. Yes, he did have a bit of a shaky start, especially when his voice started out a little bit on the thin side, and there were moments where he was quite drowned out by the orchestra, and there were also moments where he didn't sound dark enough or didn't sound that much of a basso cantante singing Hans Sachs, but his low notes got way better in the third act, and he was able to produce such velvety tones in his Madness monologue. Although I can never ever forget the darker, richer, rounder voices found in the likes of Ferdinand Franz, Hans Hotter, Karl Ridderbusch, and even Franz Krass, especially where my number one favorite Hans Sachs of all time, Karl Ridderbusch, is concerned, because I always love it when I hear a basso cantante singing this role, unless I forget about Ferdinand Franz, who can also sing a lot of these wonderful basso cantante and basso profondo roles exceedingly well, aside from the Helden baritone roles that he was very well known for. But I totally digress, because Ferdinand Franz, especially Franz, as well as Karl Ridderbusch, were darker, rounder, richer, and more cavernous voices who were more capable of singing Hans Sachs, complete with power and complete with strength and virility like the true basso cantantes that they were. Nevertheless, with Johann Reuter, he was still a dedicated singing actor. Yes, he did suffer from thinness. Yes, he did suffer from throatiness, which relatively hampered his vocal performance, but that is quite the dent to pay for what is otherwise a very interesting and quite exciting performance of Hans Sachs, who, although tended to have some vocal problems here and there, he was able to be a trooper, push forward, and just give the goods as this iconic cobbler. Tobias Kira did amazingly in his double duty roles of Hans Schwarz and the Night Watchman, all thanks to his trademark basso profondo / basso cantante voice that he was able to produce all of these velvety, gorgeous, virile, and masculine tones that made me thoroughly attracted to him, and he was in exceptionally tip-top shape tonight. Byung-gil Kim was also equally virile, as well as strong and just amazingly stately as Hans Foltz, all thanks to his trademark basso cantante voice that he was able to use very well in this role, and I do hope that he will continue to grow from strength to strength, as well as thoroughly develop his technique to sing all of the great basso cantante roles, because once he continues developing his technique, he will shine like the brightest of diamonds, and I also do hope to see him one day in the role of Hans Sachs, because he does have potential to take on that role. Thomas Lehmann continues to demonstrate vocal strength, absolute perseverance, and true virility as Fritz Kotner, and his voice also grew in depth and richness, thus making me adore his darker, rounder, and finer baritone voice a whole lot more, and his strengths as a performer, both vocally and theatrically, managed to be in total effect tonight. Yes, I do miss that additional darkness found in Gustav Neidlinger, who is also one of my favorite Fritz Kotners, as well as one of my favorite Hans Sachs of all time, but I could totally forgive all that because Thomas Lehmann is in a class of his own as an accomplished musician and an equally strong singing actor. Equally stronger tonight was none other than Philipp Jekal as Sixtus Beckmesser, and his voice definitely grew in volume and power, and not to mention perseverance. I have seen this baritone grow from strength to strength. Yes, he did start off with a slightly more tenorish voice, and yes, that tenorish voice is still in effect with his performance as Sixtus Beckmesser, but it is compensated with additional power, with additional squillo, as well as way more vocal presence than ever before. Yes, I do miss that additional depth in true baritones who sang Sixtus Beckmesser, including my personal favorites being Erich Kunz, Renato Capecchi, Tony Blankenheim, and Hermann Prey, especially where Tony Blankenheim is concerned, all thanks to his beautifully round bass baritone / baritone voice. And I'm pretty sure that Philipp Jekal can continue to grow in depth and power so long as he continues to sing pharyngally, as well as continue to make wise decisions with his choice of roles. Steven Bronk continues to be a fine and strong singing actor as Hermann Ortel, and Simon Pauli was tall and handsome as Konrad Nachtigall. I am rather conflicted with Magnus Vigilius as Walter von Stolzing. Yes, he does cut a dashing and fine stage presence and quite a masculine and attractive presence to boot, especially when he graces the stage. And he does look nice and approachable every time he's on stage. He does imbue this role with sufficient nobility, and he does hit the notes quite well. He also has some good chest tones to boot. However, there were several occasions where I felt like his voice was on the white side and sort of on the bland side, which is due to his nasality, due to not finding a lot more overtones and more colors and more depth with his voice, thus making his vocal performance sort of on the lackluster side. But at least he had good musicianship. He at least managed to persevere well in this role, and he was able to have a rather interesting timbre, which could develop very well considering the repertoire that he specializes in, which is mainly the dramatic tenor / Heldentenor repertoire of Lohengrin, Parsifal, Walter von Stolzing, Sigmund, Siegfried, and even Radames from Aida. That right there is great material that Mr. Vigilius is working with, but it's kind of hampered with a voice that is on the white and nasal and kind of bland side that lacks color and that lacks a little bit more oomph and excitement, because every time I think about favorite tenors who sang Walter von Stolzing, my mind and ears turn to the likes of Bernd Aldenhoff, Hans Beurer, Wolfgang Wingassen, Spas Wenkow, and even James King and Jess Thomas. Those were richer and more exciting voices, unless I forget about the likes of Peter Anders, Rudolf Schock, Richard Tauber, Brian Sullivan, and Charles Hackett, unless I forget about Helge Roswenge, who were natural lyric tenors with a spinto edge to their voice and had way more squillo. The biggest problem that I've had with Magnus Vigilius is that, yes, he sang his notes well. Yes, he managed to hit the high notes well, but there was just a lack of charisma, which is due to the lack of proper squillo, and I do hope that he develops his technique in the right way by eliminating nasal singing, by eliminating masky singing, because what he produced tonight was masky singing that hampered his vocal performance and therefore made his voice sound white and pretty bland. But I'm sure that with the material that he's working with, I am darn sure that he will develop his technique in the best way possible so that he can let his voice ring properly and just let his voice out with abandon and not let it be stuck and clipped, because there were several occasions in which his voice was quite drowned out by the orchestra, and there were occasions where even when he tried to sing as freely as possible, it felt like his wings were being clipped. Nevertheless, I do hope that he can find a way to ensure that his voice grows in brilliance and charisma, because he is working with tender and great material there. I just do not want to see and hear Magnus Vigilius wasting his talent, because, like I said before, he's got great material to work with. It's just that he needs to let his voice out a lot more. It's got an interesting timbre, but it's got to develop in proper squillo singing, as well as making sure that his singing is way more open and way more free for all the audience to hear. Ya-Chung was very impressive as David, the cobbler's apprentice, and his signature lyric tenor voice that is also very capable of doing these buffo roles continues to grow in brilliance, charisma, charm, and volume. Most importantly, volume, because it is way more present than ever before. I have seen him grow from strength to strength, from doing all of these character roles to shining on his own as a fine leading man, let alone assistant leading man to all of these singers, and even standing on his own 2 feet, thus showing strength, determination, and a whole lot of charm and charisma. Yes, I do miss that additional depth and lyricism in terms of my personal favorite Davids found in Anton der Mota and Koloman von Pataki, lest I forget about Horst Laubenthal, who is also my personal favorite David of all time, because they had beautiful lyric tenor voices that were so pleasing to the ear and that were so clear to listen to. And the only thing that could work against Ya-Chung Huang's vocal favor is the tendency to sing in the mask, which caused his voice to sound nasal, but even with that nasality being a vocal flaw, he was still able to produce those exciting tones and give off an equally exciting performance as David. If he can sing way more pharyngally, sing more chestily, and even sing with more open chest tones, I am pretty sure that his voice can continue to grow in stronger presence as well as way more opulence. But as I heard him tonight, yes, that additional opulence is there, but it can grow in more opulence as long as he eliminates masky singing and just commit to pharyngeal singing. Nevertheless, Ya-Chung Huang did an admirable job as David all the way through, all thanks to his vocal charisma and his charm as a singing actor. Clemens Bieber's Ulrich Eislinger was beautifully sung, all thanks to using his signature lyric tenor voice to make this master singer come to life, and he was also in tip-top shape as he's always been. Jörg Schörner was also a fine Balthasar Zorn, all thanks to his signature character tenor voice, being put to exceptional use, Burkhard Ulrich managed to take advantage of his signature fine character tenor voice to make Augustin Moser his own and do so with charisma and charm. And even Gideon Poppe managed to use his signature light lyric tenor voice that can do both these charming light lyric tenor roles and these buffo tenor roles all the way through and with great success, thus making his performance as Kunstvogelgesang an absolute treat to listen to. Katrin Göring was a solidly sung Magdalena, and she does possess a silky and lovely tone that can be suitable for singing all of these Zwischenfach roles, considering the career that she's built from singing roles like Brangäne from Tristan und Isolde, Ortrud from Lohengrin, the Overseer from Elektra, Octavian from the Rosenkavalier, Magdalena, of course, and even having a go at the pure soprano role of the Marschallin from the Rosenkavalier. She does have wonderful material to work with a voice that does show sensitivity, lyricism, and has the potential for additional beauty. I say she does have potential because while she is almost there, there is something that is working against her favor as a singer, and that is insufficient core. Her insufficient core tended to make her sound as if though that she was disappearing in the orchestra. There were occasions where she sounded faint, and there were also occasions where her chest tones were kind of non-existent, but she still had that nice and sensitive tone, but she just needs to develop a lot more in chestiness, because who I have in my ears as my personal favorite Magdalenas are the following mezzos: Kerstin Thorborg, Martha Lipton, Georgine von Milinkovic, Elisabeth Högen, Hilde Rössel-Maidan, Grace Hoffman, and my number one all-time favorite, Christa Ludwig. All thanks to how she was able to make her mezzo-soprano voice just glow from the bottom notes all the way up to her exciting top notes. And if we're talking about deeper mezzo-sopranos, let alone those bordering on contraltos, complete with chestier tones, look no further than Kerstin Thorborg, Margareta Klose, or even if you're looking at the way older school singers, Ernestine Schumann-Heink, who also had Magdalena in her repertoire. Unless they forget about Martha Lipton, who also had sufficient chest tones, and even Hilde Rössel-Maidan, who also sang a lot of these mezzo-soprano and contralto roles with ease and beauty. I'm sure that if Katrin Göring can be inspired by these mezzo-sopranos, let alone contraltos, whether they be Christa Ludwig or Kerstin Thorborg, she can definitely learn a few things of how to do proper chest tones very well so that she can keep growing as a singer. She was sufficiently solid as Magdalena. When she continues to develop her chest tones and sing way chestily than ever before, and using those chest tones to her advantage, she can grow stronger as a singer and stronger as a singing actress, thus showing more improvement and showing way more clarity in everything she does. Out of all the singers tonight, Elena Talagova surprised me and impressed me as Eva Pogna. What made her thoroughly strong tonight was her reliable technique, all found in her trademark, silvery and shimmering lyric soprano voice that can shimmer to the top and even have some decent chest tones to boot and have a nice middle range, thus making everything just absolutely beautiful and charming and really exciting to listen to. I do argue that the creaminess found in the likes of Elisabeth Grümmer, Elisabeth Redberg, Hilde Zadek, Hilde Konecny, Katharina Ligenza, Lisa della Casa, and Irmgard Siegfried was missing because I've always loved a full lyric soprano, let alone a spinto soprano singing Eva. Someone who can be able to sing over that orchestra while producing these strong and beautiful tones, especially where the likes of my personal favorite Eva of all time, Elisabeth Redberg, is concerned. And if I'm looking for someone way more lyrical, I cannot take my ears off of Elisabeth Grümmer, Lisa della Casa, or even Sena Jurinat, because they had fuller tones and richer lyric soprano voices, and even creamier lyric soprano voices at that can be exciting from bottom to top, especially where Elisabeth Grümmer's versatility is concerned, thus making her another personal favorite Eva of all time. However, that is not to undermine the talent, the determination, and the valiance that Elena Zalagova provided as Eva Pogna. She was sufficiently brave to tackle this role. Yes, my skepticism did override me in terms of how Elena Zalagova was going to fare, because this was a soprano who would be way more accustomed to singing the likes of the Woodbird or Voglinde, or even one of the Flower Maidens from The Ring and Parsifal respectively. But she thoroughly surprised me as Eva Pogna because the fact that she was able to make her voice ring throughout the theater and was able to rely on technique with everything she's got is not only laudable, but showed just how much of a dedicated and extremely skilled singer she was, thus showing versatility as well as sufficient charm to make the role of Eva Pogna her own. So overall, this singing was quite good, even though it did vary from quality to quality. There is no doubt that among all the men, Albert Pesendorfer was the strongest performer as Veit Pogna, all thanks to his trademark basso profondo voice that is so capable of also singing basso cantante. And out of all the women, Elena Zalagova also stole the show as Eva Pogna. Therefore, Albert Pesendorfer and Elena Zalagova deserve gold medals all the way through. That is not to forget about the efforts done by the other singers. Magnus Vigilius, despite his nasality and despite his voice showing some signs of his wings being clipped, he was still able to be a dedicated singing actor as Walter von Stolzing and used his strengths to make his characterization come to life. Johann Reuter, despite having some moments of dryness and having some moments where he was very throaty in his singing, he was still able to show improvement in the third act of the opera, especially where his low notes, let alone chest tones, were very fully realized. I dare not forget about Ya-Chung Huang, who was thoroughly strong as David, even though he could benefit from more pharyngeal singing. And Katrin Göring as Magdalena, even though she did have her issues with chorless singing, as well as a voice that could benefit from a lot more chestiness and a lot more volume, as well as additional richness, she still had a sensitive and really fine tone as Magdalena. And I'm sure that that sensitivity and that additional beauty can be at her advantage once she develops her core a lot more, strengthens it, and even use way more chest tones. And with Philipp Jekal, he was definitely an involved singing actor as Sixtus Beckmesser, even though he could grow in additional depth and richness as a baritone. And Thomas Lehmann, he is absolutely reliable, and he has definitely grown way stronger than ever before, thus owning the role of Fritz Kotner with everything that he's got, both vocally and theatrically. The other master singers in the forms of Tobias Kira, Byung-Gil Kim, Steven Bronk, Simon Pauli, Clemens Bieber, Jörg Schörner, Burkhard Ulrich, and Gideon Poppe were superbly sung. And special acknowledgement also has to go to the assistant apprentices sung by Alexandra Dyachenko, Ye Hui-jong, Natalie Jurk, Agata Kornaga, Freya Müller, Sotiris Haralampoulos, Simon Grinberg, Jong-woo Hong, Leon Jurlink, Kyung-lul Kim, Kang Yun-shine Lee, and Thoma Wutz for using their vocal talents and their fine instruments to make these apprentices come to life in all their vivacity and all of their excitement, and for continuing to show a lot of promise as singing actors who are just so full of vibrance and so full of great promise to come. Extra kudos also has to go to the player of the Beckmesser harp, Virginia Gut-Schewitz, for doing an excellent job in accompanying Philipp Jekal with his solo numbers, and also for giving that particular playing style a whole lot of personality and charm. Therefore, all the singers managed to pull everything together, even in spite of some moments of weaknesses, but their collective strengths more than compensated for whatever problems there were, and the results were quite fascinating all the way through. The conducting done by Ulf Schirmer shows sufficient nuance as well as sufficient interest. Yes, there were occasions where he did go a bit wild with the brass section, and there were also occasions where he could have used a little bit more color and a little bit more nuance, especially when trying to balance the brass segments and just use it a little bit more sparingly. But other than that, he was able to keep the tension going on, he was able to keep the excitement going on, and what more can you expect from the chorus and the orchestra of the Deutsche Oper Berlin? They were all reliable all the way through, and they deserve every bit of applause I could give to them. So overall, with a regie production that did show some signs of diverging from the text, as well as having some interesting ideas, as well as just having some directions that I didn't expect to see, let alone some directions that were kind of entertaining in hindsight. And with some choices made, it was still kind of okay to watch, but I still recommend a more traditional production of the Meistersinger von Nürnberg. However, the singers managed to show a unitedly strong effort all the way through, with Albert Pesendorfer leading the helm among the low-voiced male singers, Ya-Chung Huang singing up a storm among the tenors, and Elena Zalogova pleasantly surprising me as Eva Pogner, considering that this was her role debut, which she managed to succeed with flying colors. And lest I forget about the equally unitedly strong efforts from Byung-Gil Kim all the way up to Burkhard Ulrich, as well as Gideon Poppe as all the master singers, and lest I forget about Magnus Vigilius, Philipp Jekal, and of course Thomas Lehmann, especially Thomas Lehmann, for continuing to show strength and virility as Fritz Kotner, and even despite some of Magnus Vigilius's and Philipp Jekal's vocal problems, and lest I forget about Johann Reuter's shortcomings of being kind of masky and throaty, I could still kind of forgive that, because Magnus Vigilius, Philipp Jekal, and Johann Reuter were still strong performers and were still very involved with their characters. And even among the other low-voiced male singers, Thomas Lehmann continues to show strength and virility in everything that he has been accomplishing thus far. Therefore, the singers managed to stay united even with some of the shortcomings here and there, and they were able to show a lot of guts in everything that they've done, and especially when it came to the young singers who sang the assistant apprentices. They were all brilliant all the way through, and they managed to show united efforts and shine all the way through. And for those of you who caught this production of the Meistersinger von Nürnberg by Wagner at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, what did you think of it? Did you enjoy the production, or did you feel like this production was not for you and you would rather stick with something more traditional? Was there a singer who stole everybody's thunder, whether it be Albert Pesendorfer as Veit Pogner, or even Elena Zalagova as Eva, unless they forget about Ya-Chung as David? Was there a singer that you were not particularly fond of and you would have loved to hear a lot more improvement from? Or did you feel like the singing and the production were not really to your liking? Please comment below and let me know. Well, that's it for my review of Wagner's Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. Tune in next time for another review. So until then, good night, everybody.